He moved like he had nothing to prove, so they treated him like he had nothing to protect. But there's a difference between being unseen and being underestimated. Every weekday evening at 8:45 sharp, Elijah Monroe walked through the side entrance of the Franklin Avery building with a mop bucket in one hand and a clipboard tucked under his arm. He wore the same thing every time: pressed navy work pants, an old maintenance polo, and a faded black baseball cap with no logo. The security guard on duty nodded without ever making eye contact, and Elijah never minded. He was quiet, neat, efficient, never late, never loud. He swept the halls, mopped the corners, and disappeared into utility closets without a word. He seemed to belong to the building in the same way the marble floors did: constant, invisible, overlooked. He always started on the lower floors: restrooms, break rooms, lobby edges. Then, like clockwork, around 10 p.m., he moved up toward the executive suites. No one questioned it. Why would they? It was just a janitor doing his job. But Elijah didn't carry cleaning supplies on those late floor walks. Just that clipboard. And a pen. And eyes that noticed things no one else cared to. On that particular Thursday night, the building felt emptier than usual. Rain slicked the sidewalks outside. Thunder rolled softly through the air vents. Elijah was walking the 18th floor, a floor mostly occupied by a fintech firm run by very young men with very loud voices, when it happened. A young white woman, maybe mid-20s, wearing a tailored blazer and an anxious expression, stepped out of a glass-walled conference room and froze when she saw him standing by the water fountain jotting something onto his clipboard. He nodded. She didn't respond. Her eyes dropped to the tool belt around his waist, then back to the clipboard. Without a word, she turned around and made a call from the hallway phone. Security. There's someone on this floor I don't recognize. He's writing something down. He's got tools. I don't think he's supposed to be up here. By the time the security guard reached the floor, Elijah had moved to the corner office. He was inspecting the air vent, squinting slightly as if measuring airflow with instinct. The guard didn't ask questions. He saw a black man in work clothes near a private office after hours, with no cleaning cart in sight. He called the police. 10 minutes later, Officer Travis Rollins arrived. Big frame, buzz cut, fast talking, the kind of cop who looked for problems so he could feel like the solution. He walked into the 18th floor with his hand already on his belt. "You there. Step away from that vent."
Elijah turned slowly, calm. "Evening, officer."
"Name?" "Elijah Monroe." "ID?" Elijah reached into his shirt pocket and handed over a slightly worn Franklin Avery building access badge with a magnetic stripe and his name typed neatly in small font. Rollins barely glanced at it. "This doesn't look like a real ID. It's the one I've used for years." "What's your job title?" "I do inspections, preventive maintenance, light cleaning when needed." "So you're the janitor?" "I do what needs doing."
Rollins stepped closer.
"You don't work for the company on this floor?" "No, sir." "Then why are you up here after hours?"
"I'm authorized to be."
Rollins didn't like the answer. His voice shifted. "Authorized by who?" "I don't report to anyone in this building directly." Rollins raised an eyebrow. "That's funny, because from where I'm standing, this looks a lot like trespassing and suspicious behavior." Elijah didn't flinch. "I'd like you to check the building log." "We'll do that after you're detained. Turn around." "For what?"
"For refusing to provide valid identification."
"I provided it." "I said valid."
Elijah looked at him for a moment, long enough to measure something in the man's eyes. Then he turned around.
The cuffs were tight. Rollins walked him down the long hallway with a hand firm on his shoulder. The glass walls reflected the image back over and over, A black man in cuffs being escorted through a space he was supposed to be cleaning. A few employees, still working late, watched from behind screens. No one said a word. As they waited in the lobby for backup, Elijah stood still, wrists behind his back. He wasn't angry, he wasn't afraid. He looked tired, like a man who'd seen this scene before. Rollins leaned in. "What were you writing down anyway?" Elijah looked him dead in the eye. "Just making notes on my building." Rollins scoffed. "Your building?"
Elijah didn't respond,
But the words were already working their way into the room, because some truths don't need to be shouted.
they just need time to be revealed.
They processed him like any other suspect. Fingerprint scan, property bin, stern looks, smirking ones, and a clipboard shoved toward him with lines for occupation and address. Elijah filled it out without resistance. Block letters, no expression. He sat on a hard bench in a small grey room that smelled like metal and damp paper. No cuffs now, but he might as well have still been wearing them. The silence around him felt like a cage. Officer Rollins stood nearby, bragging softly to a younger officer about how quickly he'd neutralized the situation. He was creeping around the top floors like he owned the place, Rollins said with a dry laugh.
No tools, no supervisor, no clue. Had that calm look, always the calm ones you watch out for.
Elijah didn't react. He'd heard men like Rollins his whole life. He knew what they said when they didn't think you were listening. At 12:16 a.m., a detective walked in and glanced at the form Elijah had filled out. He paused, then raised an eyebrow. "You listed your employer as MPG Holdings?" "Yes." "As in Monroe Property Group?" "Yes." The detective looked at Elijah more carefully now. "Do you work in one of their buildings?"
I own them.
The room went still.
He didn't say it with attitude.
Didn't smile, just placed the sentence in the air like a fact waiting to be caught. The detective frowned, left the room, and returned with a laptop. Pulled up a corporate registry database. Searched the name. There it was.
Elijah D. Monroe, Managing Director.
Majority shareholder, multiple filings, Carmichael Holdings, Franklin Avery Building, Midtown offices, more. Rollins leaned over, reading the screen with narrowing eyes. That can't be the same guy. He's a janitor.
The detective didn't respond. Instead, he looked back at Elijah.
"You have an attorney you'd like us to call?" "No need. She's already on the way."
At 12:31 a.m., a tall black woman in a long wool coat stepped into the precinct like she owned the floors beneath her heels. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice.
She handed a business card to the front desk officer and said simply, "General Counsel for Monroe Property Group. I'm here for Mr. Elijah Monroe." The room shifted. Rollins stood frozen. Elijah was released without ceremony. The property bin returned, wallet, pen, clipboard, all placed gently in front of him. As he buttoned his coat, Rollins muttered under his breath, "You could have said who you were." Elijah looked up at him. "And you could have asked." Rollins stiffened, caught in a truth too quiet to fight back against. Outside, the lawyer's car waited in the cold. They rode in silence for a few blocks until she spoke. "You all right?" "Yeah," Elijah said. "Didn't expect a long night, but I've had longer."
You want me to file something? He shook his head.
"Number, not yet." She glanced sideways. "That cop won't forget your face." "He doesn't need to. What matters is he remembers what he saw."
She nodded. I'll have the board draft a response memo for Monday.
Elijah turned to the window.
No memo. Not yet. Let the silence do the work. It lingers better.
The next morning, Elijah arrived back at the Franklin Avery building. Same uniform, same clipboard, same mop bucket. He didn't walk in loud, didn't walk in late. He just walked in like always, like the floor belonged to him, because it did. Pedro, the longtime janitor who worked the early shift, looked up from his mop as Elijah entered. "You all right, boss?" Elijah nodded. Pedro lowered his voice. "I saw what happened. They had no idea." "They never do," Elijah replied. He tapped the clipboard once with his pen and moved on. By noon, word had started to circulate. The head of building operations sent an internal memo reminding staff that all personnel should be treated with courtesy regardless of department or role. But the whispers said more than the memo did.
He owns the building?
The janitor? No, not just this one, like multiple buildings.
How do you even respond to that?
Some didn't.
Some looked away when they passed him.
Some nodded extra hard. Some avoided eye contact completely. But Elijah moved the same, floor by floor, section by section, making notes, making sure. Up on the executive level, Rollins had returned to the scene. The building's security vendor had sent him back for a scheduled training audit with the in-house guard team. He walked past Elijah near the 21st floor lobby. Elijah didn't stop, didn't break stride, but Rollins did. He looked back, said nothing. Just stood there, holding silence in his hand like it weighed too much to carry. Elijah turned the corner and kept moving. Because he had floors to check, he had buildings to run, and he had nothing left to prove. Not to them, not to anyone.
By Monday morning, the story had already spread.
Not on the news, not in headlines, but in whispers between offices, at break-room counters, and behind closed doors with nervous glances. The building's tenants had started connecting dots. The man they'd seen cleaning floors, the man in handcuffs Friday night, he wasn't fired. He wasn't gone. In fact, he was back early that morning, walking the property in a clean grey polo, clipboard in hand, this time with a small circular pin on his chest that read MPG Holdings, 3 letters, $300 million worth of real estate attached to them. The Franklin Avery building was one of 15, owned, operated, managed, by Elijah Monroe. The morning staff meeting for building operations was quiet. The kind of quiet that fills a room when nobody knows how to admit they were wrong. Elijah stood at the head of the table. He didn't bring notes, didn't bring blame. He started simply. "I've been walking this building for 10 years, first as a buyer, then as a partner, then as its owner. I've walked it as a suit, and I've walked it with a mop." No one spoke.
He continued. "'Cause how you walk a place says more than what you wear when you do it."
Someone near the back cleared their throat. "I didn't recognize you, Mr. Monroe. I just assumed—"
Elijah raised a hand, calm, not to silence but to steady.
"That's the point. You assumed." He paused. "Let the words land. Which means there are others you're probably assuming wrong too." The HR director, a young white man who had sent the original courtesy to all roles memo, leaned forward. "Would you like us to schedule bias training?" Elijah smiled faintly. "I'd like you to schedule listening." A beat. People don't just need to be taught policy, they need to unlearn blindness. No one said a word after that. By midweek, Elijah was being referred to differently. Not Mr. Monroe, not even Sir. People started using his full name carefully. Elijah Monroe, yes, he's in charge of the whole portfolio. Yeah, he keeps it low profile on purpose.
Remember, don't make any calls without checking with Monroe Holdings first.
Even the executives on the 25th floor, some of whom hadn't spoken to him in years, began making efforts. One offered him coffee in the elevator.
Another opened a boardroom door just to say thank you again for everything.
Elijah never broke pace,
He accepted the gestures.
but he didn't need them. The truth had already arrived, and it was speaking for itself.
On Thursday, Officer Rollins was called in for a private meeting.
Not with the building manager, not with his captain, with Monroe's legal team. And they didn't yell, didn't threaten. They asked questions, detailed, precise, about procedures, about conduct, about motive. Rollins sat rigid, the file in front of him thicker than he expected. He wasn't violent, the lawyer said, eyes sharp. He didn't lie, he presented valid ID, and you escalated without question.
Rollins swallowed.
I thought he was loitering. The lawyer tapped the folder once.
Or maybe you just couldn't imagine that a man with brown skin and a clipboard might actually own the building.
Rollins said nothing.
We're not suing, the lawyer said. That's not what he wants.
Rollins exhaled. But you will be reassigned and retrained, and this will go on your record.
Rollins nodded quietly.
They didn't offer him their hand. He didn't expect it. That same afternoon, Elijah walked the 18th floor again. This time, a few doors opened before he even knocked. An assistant handed him a new floor schematic she thought he'd want to see. A junior manager asked if he'd like to review the new lighting project they were considering. People were watching him now, really watching, but not because they feared him, because now they understood who had been among them all along. Not a man passing through. A man who had built the floor beneath them. In the lobby, Pedro approached him with a small envelope. Someone left this for you. Inside was a card, handwritten.
Mr. Monroe I apologize.
For the assumption, for the call, for not seeing, no name, no return address. But Elijah knew who it was from. He folded the card once, neatly, quietly, and placed it in his pocket. Then turned back toward the elevators. Because there were still buildings to walk, still people to watch, and still assumptions to unmake. The following week, a small metal plaque appeared in the lobby of the Franklin Avery building. It wasn't flashy, no gold trim, no ribbon cutting, just brushed steel with a simple engraving. This property is proudly maintained, managed, and owned by Monroe Property Group.
Dignity lives in every corner. Please treat it accordingly. People paused when they passed it.
Some nodded, some didn't know what to say,
but no one missed it.
And no one missed who walked through the doors the next morning at 8:44 a.m. Same man, same slow steps, clipboard in hand, only this time he wasn't invisible. The security desk stood as Elijah approached. "Good morning, Mr. Monroe," said the new guard, standing tall. The old one had been quietly removed from post. Elijah offered a nod. "Morning." Pedro was waiting by the elevator with a fresh building report. "They bumped me up again," he grinned. "Assistant facilities manager now?" "You earned it," Elijah said. "Congratulations." Pedro lowered his voice. "They're listening now, I can feel it." Elijah pressed the elevator button. They always could. They just didn't think they had to. Upstairs, a new training program was underway. Mandatory, ongoing, taught by professionals and janitors alike. Everyone, from interns to VPs, was now required to spend 1 hour a month walking with the custodial team. Not to supervise, to observe, to notice what they'd missed. The CEO of a tech firm on the 19th floor made his rounds that week and left shaken. "I didn't realize how much they notice," he said. "How much we depend on people we never even see." Elijah never brought it up again. Not the arrest, not the apology, not the badge. He didn't need to. Because change had already been planted. And growth doesn't need a speech. Just roots. One afternoon, a tenant's son, a young black boy, maybe 12, stood near the elevators watching Elijah inspect a hallway light. He walked over. Excuse me, are you the guy who owns the building? Elijah looked down, smiled. I am. The boy's eyes widened. But you're dressed like... Elijah kneeled a little to meet his gaze.
Like I belong anywhere, he said.
The boy nodded slowly, like the sentence would follow him home. That evening, Elijah stood in the lobby after hours, just watching the lights cycle through the glass. No cameras, no statements, just stillness. Because this time, when he stood still in his building, no one questioned why he was there, they just let him stand. And maybe that was the whole point.
Not to change the whole world at once, but to change the corner you walk through every day.
Until everyone walking through it learns to see.